There are rules at every corner of documentary photography, and so it'll come as no surprise that the editing process is packed full of them. But don't let that daunt you, because these rules are actually far easier to learn and to understand and to follow than you may think. In this video, I'm going to go over quite an extensive list of points, rules and considerations for you to keep in mind and apply to your editing process to make your documentary photography both more credible and more impactful and effective. And then I'm going to edit a documentary shoot of my own so that you can see all of those rules and considerations in practice. That way, when you finish this video, you will leave with a conceptual understanding of the rules and considerations of editing documentary photography and a practical understanding of how they actually come into play when it comes to editing your own work. So let's get to it. Point number one is point number one for a reason. This is like the overbearing rule of documentary photography. And if you don't follow this one, if you fail to follow this one, then all the rest are null, they're pointless. Your editing process needs to maintain authenticity. The point in documentary photography is to capture reality and to make record of real events and to tell honest and truthful stories. This means that everything you do in editing has to preserve the visual reality, which is basically what the actual scene pictured looked like to the eyes, and of the message and the story that you are telling. So basically the impression and the information that the viewers receive. Point number two, respect the narrative. All documentary work tells a story, be that the natural unfolding of an event or a person's entire life story. And so naturally, story and narrative plays a crucial role. The stronger and more intact the narrative is within your work, the better told your story is, meaning that your documentary will be more impactful and more effective. In practice, this means selecting a group of images that tell the story from beginning to end and editing the images in a way that respects and preserves the narrative and puts it right to the forefront of your work. This leads quite naturally into point three, which is story over aesthetics. In photography, it can be tempting to take your image and edit it to make it as attractive as it can be, to make it beautiful. But documentary photography just is not the place for that. This is one of the only genres where you can say that an ugly, messy, unattractive image that effectively tells a story is in all ways better than a flawless, beautiful image that just doesn't quite tell the full tale. Point four is emotional resonance. In storytelling and directly within many of the scenes you'll be documenting, emotion no doubt will play a major role. So give the emotion room to breathe within your photos and within your full project selection. This is something that viewers will be able to pick up on and understand and relate to. Point five is stylistic consistency. It got mad bright out all of a sudden. Yeah, back to this. It'll help the narrative come across more clearly if you edit the photos in your project with a consistent style, and that continuity will also help tie everything together and build an identity for the body of work that you're making. Alternatively, if your project spans many scenes or a massive time frame, maybe editing the whole project in one consistent style wouldn't work, but each shoot or each phase or each section of your documentary would certainly benefit from having some consistency within the style where it is appropriate to have everything be tied together. And then the greater project, again, is something to be considered. Point six is a really simple one. Don't play doctor. Calling back to the first point on authenticity, we're referencing doctoring here, manipulating your images. This is just a straight up no-go in documentary photography. Do not even be tempted. The second you do this, it's no longer documentary at all. But don't doctor your images. Do not manipulate them. Do not rub things out and remove them. Don't make the green grass less garish. Don't warm the image up if it's just too cold for your taste. Do not even think of using any of the AI stuff. Keep the editing and retouching within the bounds of honesty and reality, and maintain a composition that truthfully tells the story. Point seven, contextual integrity. Context is essential to ensure that your story is properly understood. So when you're editing, make sure that it is left intact and clear so that the viewers have all the information they need to properly understand your work. In editing, a lot of this falls down to cropping. Don't be too tempted to crop down and get rid of the unnecessary space around your subject, because a lot of that can be contextually really important. So mainly use things like cropping as a corrective tool, and be careful that you're not getting rid of things that would actually be beneficial rather than just corrective. Point eight is selective correction and enhancement. Now, enhancement is somewhat of a dangerous word when it comes to documentary photography, because you think of enhancing as making everything look pristine, and that's not what we're doing here, that's not the aim. But enhancement is good, it's what you should be doing, but only within the realm of honesty and reality. Enhance your images, make them look as best as they can, but mark that best level as reality, as what you actually saw when you were there. That is as best as it can get. So be selective in your corrections, make sure that you're adding light only where necessary, that you're adding saturation and boosting the colours only where necessary. For example, if everything looks a little underexposed or a little undersaturated, but do not go above and beyond, then you're leaving the realm of documentary. Point 9, don't force sensationalism. I'm going to read the definition here. Sensationalism is the act of presenting information in a way that is shocking or exciting in order to attract attention. So when you've shot a documentary, you want people to see it. You want to get it out there and to have it seen by as many people as is possible. And sensationalism would be a really effective way of doing that, but it wouldn't be very honest, it wouldn't be very authentic. And if you've got to sensationalize a documentary to get people to view it, then they're going to be disappointed when they do view it and it isn't so shocking or exciting, and it's just poor practice. Now, if your documentary, if the content within it is quite exciting or quite shocking anyway, then you might have your hands on quite an impactful documentary that might naturally spread in front of a lot of eyes. But if not, don't force it. Let it be what it is and promote it through what it is. Don't lie to get it out there. Don't fake it. Point 10, respectful editing. By the nature of documentary photography, you'll eventually at some point find yourself covering some pretty sensitive topics or some pretty vulnerable people, and you need to be respectful to those when it comes to editing. So be cautious, careful and respectful to your subject and their needs as well, because if it's a vulnerable person, you don't want to be putting their identity out there. If it's a little town that could be bombarded and ruined by tourism, you don't want to flood it with people. So you've got to be careful what you do in editing, because you do not want to cause any harm to any of your subjects. Point 11 is pretty similar to the last point, but a little more serious, and that is privacy and legal considerations. It is wise to brush up on all of the laws and contracting and privacy laws and stuff like that, because there's certain things, if you're working for certain companies or with certain people or on sensitive topics, that you're not going to be able to show when it comes to actually publicising the work. And in those cases, you might need to edit them out, or you might need to cover them up, or just not include it within a selection. And privacy is a pretty big thing as well, especially calling back to some of the things we mentioned previously. So it's kind of like that, but it's got some legal weight and real consequences. So this is like, you just really got to be careful if the subject that you're documenting is of a nature where this is relevant. Point 12 is transparency. Be transparent with everything and at every stage and at all times. With your subjects, with the people that you're working with to make the documentary, with your viewers, about the shooting process, about the editing process, about the curation, about the story and the events, about the shortfalls, very importantly the editing. Obviously that's why it's in this list. You need to be trustworthy to be able to shoot documentary. Being completely transparent with everyone about everything is a really good way to prove that you are worth trusting. Point 13, seek out feedback and critique. Not everybody sees the same way you do, and since you're trying to make your work and your editing as impactful and effective, but also as objective as possible, it can be really beneficial to seek out the opinions of other people who see things differently than you do yourself. Your work will be viewed by a wide range of different peoples that all see things differently. So seeking out the opinions of a wide range of different people when you're making the project can ensure that your editing is accurate and objective and impactful and hitting the mark everywhere it should be. Point 14, clear focus. Documentary shoots can get chaotic, they can get hectic. You're always dealing with, or you're often dealing with the unexpected and the unpredictable. And as such, it can be quite easy to capture photos where your subjects just aren't quite in focus. And when I say in focus, it's kind of got a double meaning, because you've got your depth of field in focus, like I'm currently in focus in this shot, but you've also got in focus as in the eyes are drawn to it. Because I could be in focus now, but if there was, I don't know, a bear in the back, you'd probably notice the bear pretty damn quickly, and it would instantly take the attention off me. So you've got to make sure that your subjects are sharp in focus, but you've also got to make sure that the important information that you're trying to get across is in focus, as in the viewer's eyes are actively drawn to it. This means that you've got to be quite decisive with your image selection. You might have to crop some stuff, although probably not excessively, and you've really got to make sure that the focal point of the image is the important narrative points and the subject. Another consideration which weighs in quite heavily at the selection stage is point 15, and that is narrative flow. Just like you need to make sure that the narrative and the story is prominent within the individual images, you also need to make sure that it is prominent within the entire project, across the whole selection. You should edit in a way that guides the viewers through the entire series of photos, through the whole story, naturally and without any friction. So a lot of this is within the selection stages and within curation, which I suppose is like the back end part of the editing. But at the same time, you've got to make sure that each image has the right information within it, that when you put them all together, the whole story is perfectly painted. Point 16, conservative cropping. There is a lot of power in cropping. You can remove a lot of information from an image and completely change the composition. So you've got to be really careful with what you crop out and what you leave in. So be conservative with how much you crop and how often you crop. Try to keep it quite original and quite wide, as in as wide as you've shot it, because that preserves all the information and it's more authentic. So leaving the crop as original is usually the better option, especially if you've got like a wider shot. But if you've got like a detailed shot, like it's just of an item or of someone's hands, then cropping can be really effective to center them and to make the image more attractive, because that is still an important thing, and that way you're not cutting out any important information. So only crop conservatively. Point 17, don't disregard the ordinary. Another with some weight in the selection process, but also with some weight throughout the whole editing process. You are documenting reality, and reality is sometimes mundane. So if as part of your documentary you've documented something a bit mundane, don't just throw it out and disregard it, because it is still an important part of the reality that you're trying to portray. So don't disregard the ordinary. There's a lot of beauty in it, there's a lot of power in it, there's a lot of feeling and narrative in it, but keep it in. Maybe not the whole thing just being mundane, but some mundane and some ordinary things and scenes are, well, it's documentary, so they're essential. So don't throw them out. In fact, sometimes they even deserve the front seat. I'm working with sunlight here. I don't own lights yet, so bear with. Now I'm just going to summarise, because I'm sure there's some of you that didn't want to sit through the whole list, although probably would have helped you if you did. So I'm just going to summarise it all. Think of your documentary photography as being on a spectrum from perfect truth on one end to complete fabrication on the other. When you take your photo, a documentary photo, it's probably around, there is no scale on the screen I'm looking at, so I'm completely guessing, but it's probably around here, near the complete perfect truth end, but not quite there, because obviously the camera doesn't capture everything exactly how it is, it captures it how it's set to capture it. This obviously means that oftentimes the photo you take might be a bit too dark, a bit too bright, a bit too vibrant, a bit too warm, a bit too anything, you know? So when you take the photo, as long as it's taken well and skillfully, then it's usually near the perfect truth end of the scale. So when you come to editing, you want your editing to move it closer to the perfect truth. You'll never quite get there, because such a thing doesn't really exist, but that's your aim. You're trying to move it as close to perfect truth and genuine reality as you possibly can. So anything that you can do in editing that will move it closer to that way is good. You should be doing those things. But anything that moves it closer to the other end of the scale, closer to being a complete fabrication, that's a no-go. That is bad. You should not be doing those things. That moves it out of the realm of documentary and makes it a poor image. Right, so that's all the points I wanted to run through. That's all the rules and considerations. I think let's go through to my office and we'll edit a shoot so you can see how all of that works in practice. Let's get to it. So the shoot that I'm going to be editing today is one I've already edited. I'm going to edit it again just for you. I shot a documentary photography project on my granddad. If you've watched some of my other videos, you might have heard bits and pieces about that. I basically joined him on his days through all his hobbies, all the things that he does and the way he spends his time. And I documented the way he lives. Family preservation to pass down to future generations. And on this shoot, we went fishing at the River Tees at Piercebridge, and as you can see I took a decent few shots, and all we're going to do is we're going to go through and edit them. So first off is of course the selection. All I'm going to do is go through all of these shots, and any of them that look like they could be worth editing, I'm simply going to include, and it's as simple as that. So how do I decide which photos are worth editing and which are not? Obviously that is really easy at some points. For example, in between these two images, this one is all soft and it's not great contrast on it, whereas this one is sharp, so naturally we're going to take that one if we're going to take any of them. However, I'm not a big fan of either of those shots, so we're just going to leave them. This one obviously doesn't quite work, so we're going to keep going. So this is the first one I'm going to include. This is his walking stick for when he goes wading. It's got his initials in it. Very cool bit of kit, so naturally we are going to include that. I think this one's pretty decent. Got a good bit of detail there on the float. Keep that one in. It's a little bit soft on that one, so we're going to leave that. We're going to leave that one. That one's not too bad. I think we can probably salvage that, so we'll keep that one in. These are kind of non-shots. There's not really much going on. This one would be nice. I would really like this shot, but it's a bit, well, it is just overexposed in the whites there, and it's hazy everywhere else, so I'm not going to include those ones. This one's a bit of a non-shot. You know what? I don't hate that one. We'll include it and just see if we can do anything with it. Yeah, I quite like that one actually. We'll keep that one in. It has actually been a while since I originally edited this shoot. I shot this a while ago now. So looking at the unedited photos is fresh. So a lot of these that I'm just not going to include. Like for example, these ones, I was going for some like environmental shots, just shots to set the scene of where we were. I just don't quite like anything about them. Like I don't think there's anything that stands out, and I vividly remember the day. These just don't feel poignant enough to be worth including. This isn't too bad, but the framing's not great. It would be way better to get more of the fishing rod in, and it is quite dark, so we won't take that one. Right, I quite like this one. It's a detail shot. You got all the hands and everything in there. I think it looks quite nice because you've got action. You can see that like this is in the middle of something. So I quite like that one. We'll include that one. Quite like this one. You can see that the line is tight, so there's obviously something on the end of it. That is important to this narrative, to fishing, especially when the shot that follows it is the fish. So we definitely want to include this. This one to me looks pretty good. Looks sharp. There is nice light and dark. That is the one we'll take, and then we can just recenter that pretty easily. So we're definitely going to take this one. As you can see, we've got the maggot on the hook. It's an important piece of the puzzle. We'll take that. I did obviously shoot some portraits of my granddad as well, so we will certainly take those. You know what? I'll take that one as well, and we'll call it there. So here's our first shot. How do we want to approach this? Well, because this is just a photo of an item, so the focus entirely is on the walking stick here, and there is not really much in the way of external context around that. There is of course the fishing rod. Don't really want to get rid of that. In terms of just the walking stick, we want to make sure that that is centered in the middle of the frame, preferably with that art with these initials centered. So we're going to have a look at the cropping. To me, that looks about centered, so we'll crop it there. This looks a little bit dark. I think a lot of this is kind of just getting lost in there, so we're going to just brighten up the lower end there a little bit. There we go, that's a bit better. Now we've pulled back some of those details in, and that is mostly, let's see if it'll get rid of some of the noise. As you can see, this won't change a great deal at all about the image. It will still be the same image, it'll be authentic, but it will get rid of some of that noise and some of the messiness that's on the top of it. Because we haven't overused it, we've just took out some of the grain there. So this looks more like the eye saw it. I'm happy with that shot as it is. We shall move on to the second. I've got no problems with reframing this one a little bit, but not a great deal, because you can see the trees in the, I think that's the church at Pierce Bridge, if I remember rightly. It's just over the river. So all I'm going to do is try and make sure that this is actually centered. Now, because it's diagonal, the center point will be somewhere in the middle. So I actually think that's all. It barely even needed cropping. So we'll do that. I'm going to up the shadows, just the blacks a little bit, to get a bit more of the rod back, because the rod was a little bit, you're losing a bit there, and we want some of that red to come through. Honestly, I don't think that this image needs anything else. It's not particularly noisy. It's all monocolor, so you can't really see any of that anyway, even if there is a bit of grain, a bit of noise in there. It's sharp, the lighting's fine, color's fine, so we'll move on. Right, so this one, the colors look a bit off. immediately. It looks, so all of this is actually, all of the brown looks a bit too magenta to me. So we're going to want to get rid of some of that if we can. Yeah, so I won't do it all the way, but I'll do it a little bit like that. So, I mean, it's a pretty subtle difference at the end of the day, but the brown dirt on the floor wasn't magenta in colour, so a colour correction there was certainly needed. And you can see that that colour has also corrected the wood bit of the net. It's a little more yellow now than it was before, so that's good. But other than that, the colours are the better. I think the green needs a slight change, because although it was pretty dead, it didn't quite look as dead as it does there on the left. But I would say that will do it for colours. Right, now, the blacks are looking a little dark on this, so all I'm going to do is up those a little bit. That seems about right. We've got a lot more life in that image now. And then other than that, just make sure he's roughly centered, which will be a very minor crop like that, I believe. And that's that image as well. Right, now this one I definitely didn't edit before. I remember editing the other 2, 3 when I originally edited the project, but not this one. So this is fully new. All I'm going to do here is brighten some of these shadows and blacks where we're practically losing a bit of detail, because we don't want to be losing any detail. But the whites are slightly blown out on the back of his hand, but that's not too big of a deal here. We'll just lower it slightly. That should be fine. I'm going to rotate it just so it's level, because you don't want a pointlessly ugly image. That doesn't need to be so. And then I'm actually going to crop in a little bit just to make sure he's a bit more on that left third. Yeah, that's a lot better. So I'm much happier with the framing of that. And the narrative of the story in this image is he is walking out, he is going out to Wade. So that's the important information we need to keep alive in this one, which we've not ruined so far with what we've done. Now all I'm going to do is go to these greens and add a little bit of luminance, because they are getting lost there in the back. We'll just brighten them a tiny bit, and then I would say that that is done. We've fully brought that back. Obviously it didn't look that dark to my eyes, it looked far more like this, so that is good. I actually really like this image. I did struggle editing it before because it is so dark, but I think what we need to focus on is just separating him from the backdrop, just so he doesn't blend into it, because there's no point losing the detail like that. It is fairly sharp, he's in focus. All I'm going to do is, so I've pulled it back so that it's not just solid black behind everything, and I think that's done quite a lot for the image, if I'm being honest. Just pull the blacks up a tad bit more, that should be good. I'm going to up the texture a tiny bit just to try and separate him on the outlines. It's not a noisy image, so it doesn't need denoising. Happy with that. That was a lot easier than it was the first time I did it. So I know that I've got a good few shots in here, like this one, and this one, that all have pretty similar lighting conditions. So once we edit one of these, we've edited them all, which is good. Pull the exposure down a little bit, but then up the darker bits, and then that feels a lot more natural. The other one was just a bit too on the bright side. This has pulled everything in a little bit. So if I just come to these ones and do the same, and that just pulls down some of those bits that are getting a little bit too bright there. Literally just pulling the image back from being a bit too dark. I mean, the thing with documentary photography is if you've shot it pretty accurately to the lighting, you really don't need to do much in the way of editing. It's just corrections. If everything's pretty much correct, then you don't have to make many corrections, which is nice. Now this one needs a crop. So obviously you can see if I crop it to like there, what information are we losing? So we're losing a bit of his body, but we've got his body in, so that's not necessary information. We're losing a bit of the river and the bit of the bank, but we've got the river and the bank in, so that's not strictly necessary information. Thus, I have no problems with cropping those out. So we've still got all the necessary contextual elements in the image after the crop. We've just made it more attractive and pulled the focus into the narrative element, which is of course the reel and the fishing rod. So that's that sorted. Now this image is going to need a little more editing than some of the others actually. It is too dark. When we were stood there, it did not look that dark. Obviously when we were in the environment, it was the middle of the day. This is just a camera being a camera. It can't do everything. So all we need to do for this is pull the blacks and the shadows up just a bit. As you can see, that's done a lot for the image already. And now it's just cropping. So again, if I crop this so that the fish is central, I'll crop it so that his hand, his knuckles here are centered pretty much bang in the middle of the image. We've not lost any necessary information. We've still got the river and the bank in, so that's fine. Now this is a little too magenta for me again. I don't know why that is. It's a white balance thing, but I don't know for what reason we had that going on. So that's getting more magenta that way. All I want to do is that. Tiny colour change and that is done. And you can see the image is still honest. I've not lied about anything. I've not lost anything necessary. All we've done is move it closer to that honesty and that authenticity and that truth, which should always be the aim. And then the portrait. So these are pretty damn good anyway. The lighting's nice. These mainly are going to need a cropping just to centre the eyes in the middle of the frame if they're not already, which they might be. So I think that's that. This one, I was going to say it had that magenta-ness going on, but it kind of just doesn't. It is already perfectly centered. It's a little too green. I mean, it was, these things are green, but just lower that because obviously nothing else was so green. The camera must have picked up a bit more green in this shot for some reason. So we'll make that a little more brown. That's bang on as far as I'm concerned. Final shot. Again, this is only going to need a crop to center the eyes. And there we go. So that's that. That is the whole documentary shoot done in 20 minutes. That full edit took me. And they were all just minor corrections. That's all these images need. Because on the day I shot them accurately to the lighting and the colour for the most part. So therefore the only things I really needed to do was minor corrections just to put it back in line on bits where it wasn't quite right. Cropping, that's always needed to focus in on the narrative points. After all, documentary is recording and telling a story, but you just want to be careful in what you're cropping. You don't want to get rid of any necessary information or any of the important narrative elements of the image. So you just got to make sure when you're cropping that you only crop out things you can afford to lose and that aren't going to affect the story that the image is telling, whether that image is on its own or is part of a series. I thought there was a red thing on my wall because right there was an overheating sign on the screen. Camera's overheating. Luckily we're done. So that's that. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something about the rules of editing documentary photography, if you feel more confident now to go forward and edit your documentary photos yourself, then drop a like and hit subscribe. I've got loads of stuff coming. I'm going to make more videos around documentary stuff because that is what I really like, but I'm going to make a load of videos around anything and everything to do with cameras as well. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.